Hello, and welcome to The Dogfight, a podcast dedicated to the London Spitfire and Overwatch League. Fasten your seatbelts and observe the no smoking sign because today we'll be discussing a bunch of drama that's been happening recently, some of it XQC related, and how that might affect Blizzard's management of the Overwatch League. Then we'll do a preview of the London Spitfire's first week of matches of the real season this time. And then we'll maybe speculate a little bit on what the starting roster might look like. I'm Havokpus. I got other people. I got CJ, who's been
Hello.
on this show before, and frozencreek, who is on bodied with me, and he runs sort of the background stuff for this show.
Yeah, in some way, I'm the producer of this show. In a way,
Hmm.
I make Havoc do all the dirty work, so I guess that means I am the producer, because I don't
Producer, director.
do the dirty work. So, I'm here as a body because we are a little short this week. I'm always here in spirit and body, just not in voice. So, bear with me, and I'll let Havoc do all the jokes.
I'm really good at jokes.
But how are
something,
your segues?
yeah, something that might not be a joke is the recent drama going on. Well, I guess not recent, quote unquote, but stuff happened over sort of the holiday break. XQC was once again suspended due to poor behavior for a few days on his account. He did apologize for it,
Hmm.
but there was not a statement from Dallas Fuel or Blizzard about the situation. And I think, it does kind of bring up the question of, like, how is Blizzard going to handle these more unruly players who intentionally throw games or are just very poorly behaved in general because they are the face of a brand, not only their
And
individual team's brand,
and
but
and they
the
really
Overwatch
are
League's
trying
brand.
to they are trying to push that whole like player as role model sort of idea, which can make difficulties kind of problematic. And on the XQC thing, I think that this has kind of resolved itself. Like, I wasn't impressed at how he reacted, like, right after everything went down, but his apology afterwards seemed, really genuine and sincere, so I'm willing to think it was kind of a lapse. But the thing that concerns me more is just, like, sort of the behavior surrounding and leading up to this incident, because, like, the dude is still trying to do full time streaming while also, being a full time Overwatch League player. And that's kind of like. That's a lot. That's a huge commitment of time and energy, and I feel like that can burn you out really, really quickly. And I think maybe that's what's happening here. Like the sort of like throwing in the game with Rascal was just him being sort of at the end of his rope and maybe not necessarily knowing how to take care of himself or cope. And this is just kind of how it bubbled over to the surface. Because like the dude said
Yeah,
on stream that he does have trouble like saying no and not like overcommitting himself.
yeah, he's also seemed to just be uh, struggling with the trying to commit with both because he there was a story of him like getting a concussion when trying to like take a shower,
Yeah, yeah.
and like he's just like I've also heard that like he has a really poor diet. He doesn't really take care of himself that well, and he's
Yeah,
just trying to
and
like still stream like he has been, but also be a Dallas Fuel player.
yeah, and
And
I
I,
think
I
that's
think that he
the
can't have both. He needs to choose. Are you a Dallas Fuel player or are you a streamer? You can't have both.
and yeah, no one's saying that he can't stream, but he's got to find like a better balance and sort of taking care of himself because like this was kind of like my concern when he got signed. Like I've never been the biggest fan of his streams. Like it's a little too like loud and in your face for me. But like I cannot deny the dude, brings it in game. He's really good as that super aggressive Winston. It's a Reinhardt who can apply a ton of pressure. His Orisa's great, but he's really like emotionally, immature in some ways. And while he's like, really great player, has a great head for the game, and I think, can add a lot to this roster. I'm worried about how he's going to take care of himself and not kind of blow up.
Yeah, and I think that considering all that's happened with him lately, I don't think he can really afford another implosion, if you will. If he has another instant of him just like throwing games or just playing a complete ass on a recorded stream, or just in a game and someone happens to be recording, then, I think Dallas Fuel or Blizzard really needs to put their foot down and say, like, all right, your behavior's making us look bad. We're going to either just bench you and bar you from some games like we did with Sato, or what. We're going to have to do something more of a disciplinary action than just make it so you can't play on one account for a few days.
Yeah, and I think that's what's going to happen if this becomes sort of a repeated pattern of behavior, because, like, this is one thing from, like, XQC does get tilted, he does, like, shout, but he, always plays his heart out. Like, if him, like, throwing games or doing things of that nature, if that happens more than just kind of this one aberrant instance, you can just, I think you'll see a fine or a suspension or something. And I think part of that kind of does segue into, like, the Shanghai Dragons thing, where one of their coaches, U4, was found to be, like, sharing accounts and negotiating with, like, players who weren't on the team without permission from management. Like, he was reaching out to players, pretty much guaranteeing them a spot on the roster when they came of age, without, consulting the managers and owners of the team. And he ended up getting fined a little over $9,000.
Yeah, I've heard that, like, the Shanghai team has done some other, like, very questionably shady stuff.
Yeah, there's the whole
Overwatch League.
There is the whole controversy with with Blizzard China. Like, that's a very complicated situation in of itself, where apparently they kind of, like, hijacked the World Cup committee.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was kind of one of the reasons behind a lot of people getting, like, switched up during the World Cup. Allegedly, I'm not super up on the whole story, just because it's not, something I've been following. But I think that sort of internal fine that the Shanghai Dragons did when Zushu and Undead got caught for account sharing, and what they've done now with U4, I think that sort of internal fine and penalty thing might become fairly commonplace for relatively minor infractions.
Yeah, we'll have to see.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say we'll just have to see, like, how, like, stuff develops, because it's actually, if you look at, like, stuff in esports, I think it's actually kind of rare for teams and players to, like, actually mess up, because they realize that, like, this is kind of my livelihood, and I don't want to jeopardize it too much.
Well, I think it's rare that they get called on it. Like,
oh yeah,
there's definitely a lot of people who will do some really, like, immature stuff, and, like, the big examples that come to my mind are, like, from StarCraft, like Naniwa walking out during his game at IEM Katowice, where he pretty much lost the first game, complained about the booth not being soundproof, and then left in, like, the World Championship for StarCraft 2 in, I think, like, 2015. But aside from, like, him getting raked over the coals by the community, there wasn't really, like, a hard punishment handed down, I don't think, at least. So I feel like esports has never really had, like, a huge... They've never had something in place to sort of address behavioral issues before, and we're seeing that happen now, I think, with, like, these stories that we're talking about, and the Immortals CSGO team.
Oh yeah, that story was hilarious. That's probably my favorite story.
Just
because of how crazy it was.
Yeah. They went absolutely, like, crazy. But so I think Overwatch League, in that it's trying to be, like, more legitimate. Um, they're going to try and really clamp down on poor behavior, things that could reflect badly on the brand of Overwatch League.
Hmm.
So, I think they're going to be watching that more closely than esports has, generally speaking, leading up to now, just because of the nature of this thing.
Yeah. Oh, hopefully they will get a tighter grasp on how to adequately discipline things. Yes, Frozen, you're
Or yes.
flashing like
So like
crazy.
I have a question that kind of puts or that kind of tries to frame it in a different context, I guess. So what would you guys consider something like account sharing or throwing a match in in like comparison to like another sport? Would you consider it just like a minor infraction, like a small one game suspension for targeting or something like that in a college football game? Or would it be something more akin to like a late hit, like Gronkowski style, where he came in on a dead play and like jumped on someone and elbowed him in the back of the head kind of thing, or like a kicking a guy in the balls in basketball, or tripping him, or blatantly like trying to hurt someone with a slide tackle in soccer. Because these are like kind of things that'll get you like a couple match suspension in other sports. Like, so how measurable do you guys think these are in comparison to punishments, and like how bad are these different infractions?
I mean, like, my initial reaction is that the, like, account sharing is relatively minor. Like, if you're doing it among, like, friends and not trying to boost people past a level that, like, they're just not at. I obviously don't know, like, who was sharing what account with, like, Zushu and Undead and the U4, so I can't say with any real certainty. I think it's definitely, like, fine and maybe a couple game suspension. It's nothing huge. I think it's definitely not good, and it looks bad. But I think throwing is the much more grievous thing, because you're not just like doing something that's a little bit questionable and kind of dilutes the quality of like matchmaking play, but you're doing something that will actively affect the outcome of a game for your team. And if people are, it's the same way that like finding out that like there's a match fixing in like boxing or something, where it sort of like delegitimizes things to a certain degree, like if people aren't trying and just give the fuck up. um and throwing has always kind of been a big deal in esports. Like, it's not throwing per se, but like the story with Naniwa that I mentioned, where he, you know, bounced after like one game and people were furious. Um, I think throwing's the bigger concern, and if that's something that people are going to, if that becomes a regular pattern of behavior, I think Blizzard will come down very hard on that.
Yeah, I think all of that is pretty fair to say, because I think that even in League of Legends they have a sometime or they sometimes have a hard time consistently trying to find sufficient punishment for different players or different teams around the world. And it doesn't help that despite being centralized under one company, that they're actually split up into different groups, so different punishments might get handed down. So I think that keeping it under Overwatch League will help, and keeping it all under one entity. But I guess I'm interested to see how they go, because it's not like 99% of the time there's physical harm being done maliciously to anyone, like you do see in real sports. So I do think that there are places where account sharing and match throwing is a huge a deal, and I don't think that they should be just a slap on the wrist. But I guess after hearing you say a little bit, I do agree that they are more on the minor side of infractions, as long as it's not like a
Well,
sustained boosting kind of thing, or a sustained just
I'll
throwing matches to fall down to a certain elo kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll definitely say I think throwing is more severe, but I don't think either of them are like I'll call them relatively minor infractions, but they're still like a big deal. Like it's still something that definitely doesn't look good, kind of, makes things a lot messier. Just it's not good for the game in terms of like helping it to be like a legitimate thing. However, what does look good is the fact that we're going to get to see our boys in action for the first games of the inaugural season of the Overwatch League.
Yes, yes, yes. Finally, it is here. I'm so excited. Their first matches for excuse me, for this week are against Miami, which is Thursday, January the 11th at 5 p.m. Eastern, and then Saturday they'll be facing it off against Philadelphia, which is Saturday, January 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And I gotta
Yep.
say, this is gonna be a pretty interesting week given our opponents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say, like, the opponents are going to be very interesting to me just because with one, we know exactly what we're getting, which, is kind of the biggest is kind of the biggest detriment for that roster, the Florida, of course. And on the other hand, Philly, we don't really know what they're going to bring to the table because they didn't end up playing in that preseason. They, visa issues, or as they very diplomatically put it, player logistics issues, kind of kept them from competing. So we don't know kind of how this roster has gelled or what sort of play style they favor.
Yeah, I think we should talk about Miami first, since
Yeah.
just that's our first match.
Mm.
Miami is a very interesting team because they only have 6 players. They're the only team that has just 6 players, which means I think they're going to kind of be at a detriment because they're not going to be able to switch out. There's not a lot of people looking at the game from like an outside perspective and saying, okay, I would have done this differently, or instead of doing this, you know, you should have done this, or I could do this and then get a different result. And just the fatigue factor. I mean, they're going to be having to play, up to 4 maps, maybe 5 if there's a tiebreaker, and they're gonna be exhausted probably.
Yeah, and I think that, the exhaustion is going to play a part of it, but I think the big thing that having this relatively limited roster, the big problem that it creates for Florida is the fact that they're relatively inflexible. Like, they don't have a super strong Mercy player. Like, Zebasai is a really strong Lucio, and he can flex onto some DPS as well. Like, uh, what's interesting is, like, almost all the people on this team can play Widow, but, like, he's not particularly strong at Mercy. Zippe is a fantastic Zenyatta, but his Mercy is, to me, a little bit questionable as well. Um, the other thing is, but yeah, the thing is, the people on this team are relatively limited. Like, they're very good at what they do, but they have a very specific niche. So when you're playing against this Miami roster, you know what you're going to be facing, and they don't necessarily have the capability to adapt the way that other teams with a larger roster do. So I think that's going to be part of what their downfall is in this coming match, because I do think London's going to be going up over in that matchup. And I think the other two sort of problems are Logix and Swoosh. Logix is a phenomenal Tracer player, but he's someone who's never been able to perform on LAN to the same level that he is online. he gets stage nerves and doesn't play as well as he does in other circumstances, and that's been a consistent problem for him. And meanwhile, Swoosh, his Winston is all right. He's was formerly a DPS player for E United and only started playing tank after he got signed by Misfits, the team that would become the Florida Mayhem. We've never seen him really break out a Reinhardt or an Orisa, so he's relatively limited in terms of what we can see him break out, unless he's keeping things in his back pocket.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at the ease of this match, just because if you compare London roster with Miami's, it's almost like an ocean against a puddle. London's strengths just kind of overlap with each other, and everyone plays. Fisher is like the best Winston in the league, probably, and going up against someone that is maybe kind of good on Winston, but not really. They're just Miami's just really going to struggle, especially if London just starts with their best foot forward and just plays the Konggu core with whoever they can kind of fit in there.
Yeah,
probably get Nuss and Fury and someone else. They'll probably just get wiped the floor with. I could imagine. I mean, I can't see the future, but
yeah. And I do think that just based on the preseason, they are going to start with Kongdu as the core. Although personally, I think they should put in Wu Xiao over Fury. Fury is a good player, but he's not someone who has ever really impressed me to the same level as someone like Wu Xiao. I think Wu Xiao is just a few steps above.
I was actually really impressed with Fury's play when he played in the preseason. Him and Nuss, just because they were kind of the newer members of the team, and I was really trying to watch them closely to see how they would play. I was really impressed with how they played and how they gelled well with the team.
Yeah, and Nuss has always been a good player. I've been a fan of his since his Meta Athena days.
He was also on Team Liquid, wasn't he, for a little while? Or was that Fury?
No, that was Nuss.
Okay.
Nuss was on Meta Athena for a pretty long time, actually. Pretty much from I think he was there from the formation of the team until London Spitfire.
Ah, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, and so he's always been a really solid support player. Fury has been hit or miss for me, and I think Monte Cristo kind of hit it on the head when he was looking at his when he was doing his preview of the Overwatch League teams, and he goes into Spitfire. That maybe the coaches saw something, some talent that they could coach and bring out of Fury, and that's why they picked him up, because there are other diva players that you would think, first. Fury's not someone who I would put in that top tier, but maybe they see something that I don't, and that's entirely possible.
Yeah, it's hard to tell exactly what a coach sees versus just a regular person. Looking at the maps for the Miami match, they have Dorado, Anubis, Oasis, and Numbani. Are we going to experience any hiccups here, or is it going to be just a standard Spitfire runs the ball down the middle kind of thing?
I honestly, none of these picks are too particularly crazy. On Oasis and Dorado, there's some room to do pharmacy play, so if you want Rascal to break out that Pharah that he's, so famous for, he can do that. But otherwise, there's nothing here that would prevent London from going to, just bread and butter, dive play. That, there's nothing to stop them from doing what brought them to the dance.
Yeah, exactly. I think we should switch gears over to something that's a bit uncharted territory and talk about Philly. For those that... Yeah, I think let's run down the Philly roster first, because we actually haven't seen this team play at all
No,
Um,
but we have seen bits and pieces of them get,
yeah,
over
yeah.
the
I
course
think
of different
some of them
tournaments.
played in like the World Cup, and I think
Yeah, a lot of them played in the World Cup, and a bunch of them were on various teams for contenders. Like, 3 out of the 12 players on this roster were players from FaZe Clan, the runner-up in Contenders NA. And getting into that, the like the people you sort of expect to be the DPS core of this team, Carpe and Shadowburn, are both former FaZe Clan players. Shadowburn's been one of like the ace Genjis since the start of Overwatch, and a lot of people know him from the huge money plays he was able to make with that Dragon Blade in the World Cup. Meanwhile, Carpe is just a monster. Just really
yeah,
great Tracer player with a whole
I
bunch of
have
other.
heard that those two have been incredibly hyped, just on an individual
Yeah,
basis.
yeah. Well, Carpe has like repeatedly over the course of several seasons been number one on the ladder in Korea for like
Oh wow.
significant stretches of time. He is mechanically so good as Tracer, but he can also break out a great Genji and McCree. Whereas Shadowburn's pretty much Genji and Pharah, there's a little bit more flexibility in Carpe and still playing at that very, very high level. And they just had immediate synergy because they both not only have a great sense of what the other is going to do, but it keeps the enemy team sort of on the back foot because either one of these guys has the capability to come in and make plays. If you stuff Shadowburn, you have to worry about Carpe as well, because if one of these guys gets in your back line, that can be just fight over like that if give them the room to operate.
Hmm.
Up next on that roster, who I believe is Snillo. And Snillo was on a team in European contenders called 123, and they performed pretty well. Like, they were a relative unknown going into this, going into contenders EU, and ended up finishing third/fourth out of the whole thing. Like, they
Oh
looked
yeah,
really
yeah.
strong.
That's where that name sounds familiar.
Mhm.
I forgot where it was.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to Snillo's really phenomenal DPS play. He just looked really good throughout the whole thing. His Tracer's great, his McCree is solid, his Soldier's great, and it's unfortunate for Philadelphia that he's not currently eligible to play. He is only 17 and they're not going to be able to put him in the game until March.
Oh, that kind of sucks.
It does, but the upside is that they've got this really talented player on sort of their back burner that they can bring in whenever they need it, when the time comes. And also because he's so young and has gotten so good so quickly, he is a player that potentially has a tremendous upside. Like, he could, you know. Continue to grow and get better, and this is a talent that they can sort of like foster going forward. And the
Oh
last,
yeah, kind of like Flower. I know Flower is another
yeah,
player that's like underage now, but eventually they'll get to play, and then
yeah,
they'll probably destroy
yeah,
everyone.
definitely. Although, like, Flower is so scary.
Oh, he's so good.
He's so good. And the last DPS player on this team is Echo, who is an Israeli player. He was kind of known for... he played on an Israeli roster called Zen Gaming Esports. And they were also Israel's representatives in the World Cup. And while Israel wasn't, as a team, able to sort of go pound for pound with the bigger, sort of esports powerhouses in their group, they did Echo was kind of a standout. Like, his soldier play was really, 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 or not soldier, his Genji and Tracer play was really, really impressive, and one of the big assets that on that team. Like, he was someone who really impressed, and again, looked like he could have a big upside. The only real sort of, like, possible issue with him is that he's not really had an opportunity to play on a big stage yet. Like, Zen Gaming Esports has been in a couple, like, small online tournaments. And not really, they haven't played LAN, so we'll see how he performs under that added pressure. Maybe he'll be able to keep it steady, maybe he'll fall off a little bit. It's hard to say, until we've seen him go out there.
Yeah.
But, again, really solid looking player who we'll see how he gels with the rest of the team. Should I just go into the tanks now, I guess?
Well, I guess tank, since Sato is serving a 30-match suspension.
Yep. Good old account boosting.
Yeah, so you won't be playing for a little while, so they have Fraggy.
Yes,
who, I think
my
that's another
boy,
name that I
Fraggy.
recognize.
I love Fraggy so goddamn much. He plays... He's known, like, mostly... People sort of know him from his time on the Ninjas in Pajamas roster, which, when that disbanded, the roster stuck together and made RIP, Rest in Pajamas, and then got picked up by Gigante. And Gigante, with that roster, were the winners.
Oh, everyone loves Gigante.
Yeah. They're the winners of Overwatch Contender Season 1, and they looked really good doing it. Fraggy, mostly known for his super, super aggro Reinhardt play. Like, it's... He reinforced
like
that
just full on like Leroy Jenkins mode, where he just rushes in and just starts swinging his hammer and
pretty
everybody.
much. He, like, as a Reinhardt player, Fraggy will just constantly apply this forward pressure and pretty much just try and wear you down through just attrition. Like, if you're the enemy tank, you almost gotta feel bad, because he's just gonna beat you in the face. Like, he's all over you. And he's also, like... I guess I'd say he's also a very lulzy Reinhardt. Like, Reinforce said it best when he said that Fraggy is the sort of Reinhardt who would like hop on the elevators on Hollywood and just chase down a widow who'd be taking shots, and then suddenly there's Reinhardt behind them, and it's like, why the hell are you here? What?
That's no place for a Reinhardt to be. Why would he be there?
No, he'll do it.
That's hilarious.
No, yeah, he's so much fun to watch. His, like, Ryan play is so crazy aggro and nutty that it's just one of the most fun things to watch. And his Winston play is also really entertaining. He plays a weird-ass Winston, though. Like, whereas most guys will, like, sort of be leading the charge, Fraggy, like, I think ZP called it, like, Secret Agent Winston, where he'll be, like, sneaking around and then jump you from behind. Like, just these really bizarre...
These tanks like assassins? That's such
I don't know. It's
it's
really bizarre, but it's so entertaining, and I love it.
Like, one, why would you do it? And two, how does it keep working?
Because no one expects it, and he's just good at what he does.
I guess no one expects it.
It's awesome, though. Like, Fraggy's one of my favorite players to watch, and, like, despite, like, me being, diehard fans of other teams, like, I'm so in Philadelphia just because Fraggy. Anyway, I can talk about Fraggy all day. But moving on, Poco. Moving on to their off-tanks, starting with Poco, who is a French player who was also on a Contenders EU Season 1 team called Gamers Origin. And Gamers Origin didn't end up, like, making it into the finals, partly because one of their DPS players, Leaf, was really, like, big into Doomfist, and when Doomfist got nerfed, sort of like in the beginning stages of the tournament, it just kind of cut the legs out from under them. But
Oh no.
Poco looked consistently awesome on the Zarya. His tracking, his, ability to build up ults, like, there's a lot of talk about him being one of, if not the best Zaryas in EU. And his D.Va plays great as well, but the Zarya is what you really want to, like, look for when you are, when you're watching this Fusion roster and they put out Poco. Next is Hotba, who I admit I haven't seen as much of because he's only played in 2 tournaments and I was only able to watch one of them. He is an off-tank player that was originally from LW Red in Korea, and his team won Apex Challengers and then came in, I think, 5th or 6th in the main tournament. And he's known really for his D.Va play. Really good D.Va player, really solid, just all around in terms of, great sense of when to be aggressive and when to sort of pull back. And I think, they're going to put him in when they want D.Va, and they're going to put Poco in when they want Zarya, so they've just kind of got their flex tank core there that they can kind of hot swap to the need to the map.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And next up is...
Oh, can I talk about Neptuno? Because I actually know about this one.
Yeah, do it.
So I know about Neptuno because he played on Cloud9's EU Contenders team.
Yes.
In season
which was,
1.
Yeah, which was Laser Kittens before they got signed.
Which was Laser Kittens, and it kind of had it was sort of like a musical chairs roster because they kept like switching people out. And I think it was mostly just Cloud9 trying to hold tryouts to see if they would do more of a European route for their Overwatch League team. But I like Neptuno. I think he was a really solid support on the team, and he was kind of one of the backbones that kind of made the team kind of stand up because they had some issues in other areas, but I think in the support role, I think at least Cloud9's contender team was pretty strong in that regard. So he's a pretty good support.
And he's also like really known for his Sombra. He plays a mean Sombra, which is another like tool that this roster can bring out situationally, and take advantage of because Sombra is so good at especially on like King of the Hill or not King of the Hill 2CP. Like if you're playing on Anubis, stick him on that Sombra for 0.2 defense, and you're gonna have a pretty nice time.
Yeah, just getting all those health packs all lit up.
Up next is Joe Meister, who is known mostly for his time in FaZe. Like, if you were a fan for a long time, you'd also know him from Complexity, back before they kind of disbanded. But Joe Meister mostly known for, like, a Lucio play for 2 things, which is his Lucio play and his shot calling. Like, he's great at sort of organizing the team and taking charge in fights and has, like, really great game sense. The only thing that I'm a little bit worried about is now that Lucio is sort of kind of out of the meta, I'm not sure where they're going to stick him, like if he's going to be playing the Mercy or doing what.
He struggled at the World Cup as Mercy, though, which I think might be a bit worrying because I think it was him and Adam were on Team Canada, and when he tried to play Mercy, he really struggled. And when Adam played Mercy, Adam, of course, looked amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm still amazed Adam hasn't been signed, but that's
I know, it's like a crime or something.
It really is. But definitely Joe Meister is someone who, it might be tricky to find a place to sort of stick him, but he's someone who definitely will have a lot of value for this team in terms of his ability to organize, shot call, and just sort of get the most out of this roster when they're on the field. Next is Dayfly, who again I really don't know much about. I know he's just a support player who was with AF Blue for a while, though the last thing I would have seen him in with that team was IEM Gyeonggi, which that was a while ago. That was the end of 2016. But more recently, he's been playing with a team called Ardeont, which is a Korean team that's mostly been playing in Pacific tournaments, like Overwatch Pacific Championship, and they absolutely dominated in those tournaments. So he is someone who is accustomed to playing on that big stage and at a high level, and I believe the hero he's sort of known for is his Ana, which, again, maybe not the strongest in this current meta, but he's probably capable of playing other things as well, and you have him ready to play that Ana should the meta swing back in that direction. And lastly is Boombox, who a lot of people will know from both United and being on the Overwatch World Cup team for the UK.
Yeah, I don't know much about him. I do know that he's a UK player. He's actually one of the few UK players to actually get into Overwatch League.
Yeah, and he's known. What he's famous for is his Zenyatta. And he's a really good Zenyatta in terms of playing support, but the thing that he's really known for doing is taking the fucking heads off of someone on the other team to start off the fight. Like, he's known for just, like, being able to snipe people from, like, across the map and giving his team the opportunity, the opening to sort of dive in and take a fight. And so that's one thing you gotta look for when Boombox is on the field, is, he can delete people with those right clicks. Like, no one is safe.
Those are really hard to do, too.
No,
like,
it is.
I've tried doing it, and I miss them, like, 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. I miss them all.
Yeah, I feel you. There's a reason I'm not a Zen main. But yeah, he didn't look quite as good. He wasn't like nailing those picks in like some of the later World Cup games. But we'll see how he does. Like, he's someone who you really can't count out of it. Despite the team that he was on, United, having like really fallen off in Contenders EU Season 1, like, because going into that tournament, they were kicking asses and taking names all over the place. United was kind of the top dog in Europe for like a good couple months leading into that, and then they end up finishing 7th.
Yeah, I was really surprised at that as well, because looking at EU, it was like, okay, Misfits and probably EU United were gonna take it, and then I was just hoping that Cloud9 could finish to a point to where they could come back next season or something.
Yeah.
And then it was really weird that they just kind of, I don't know, just died.
The Cloud9 drops them, and we get instead, the Overwatch League team that we have now, which, trust me, I ain't complaining, though I am very much entertained by the memes of roses are red, violets are blue, Jack from C9 bought GC in Kongdu. But yeah, so there maybe is a little bit of a question mark around Boombox if he's going to maintain that same level of play, but I feel pretty confident, especially, considering the people he has to back him up. But that is also kind of the problematic thing for this team, is we don't know how well they're going to back each other up. We don't know how well they're going to gel, because we haven't seen them like play together, and apparently they've been scrimming. Like, they've got some experience together, but not nearly as much as the other teams have had. So maybe this roster is going to be one that, like, the way I think it'll probably go is they're going to start off rocky, because despite having really talented people in pretty much every position, and having all the tools to be successful, they haven't maybe had that time to develop the team chemistry to the same extent that the other teams have, and so they'll start off looking a little weak, but as the season goes on, they will come together and look a lot stronger.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. Just considering all the visa issues, it's probably really limited their ability to kind of play with each other, so the synergy is probably not there. Which
Yeah.
I think will make the match this Saturday pretty interesting. The maps are Junkertown, Horizon, Ilios, and Ubani. And Junkertown's always an interesting map because, there's that pirate ship strategy that you can take, and there's also kind of this meme that, oh, Korean teams can't play Junkertown. So it'll be really interesting to
Can't
see how Spitfire kind of handles Junkertown as well as a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, I'm definitely very interested to see how this goes, especially because, like, I will say the other, like, question mark, that I've got about this team is how they're going to, like, communicate, just because they've got so many people from so many different countries speaking so many different languages that it'll take some time to figure that out. But yeah, onto like refocusing on our boys, the Spitfire, though.
Yeah, we have 12 players,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of ways to mix and match them, and I'm not really sure, and anyone's not really sure what's going to happen. I think a lot of people are thinking for now they'll still keep it kind of separate, where the KDP squad and the GC Busan squad kind of play by themselves, and then they kind of slowly integrate each other.
Yeah,
But,
and that was kind of what they were trying to do in the preseason, was just play the squads separately and see how that'll go.
I would really like to see a couple of, interesting combinations, like Prophet and Rascal would be really interesting. Or, like Fisher and
Yeah, I think if they don't
somebody
stick,
else or something.
yeah, I think if they don't stick Prophet in there in some capacity, they're losing out. That being
Yeah.
said, you've got really strong like hit scan player in Hureg, who can also break out a good Genji. Like any guy that you put in is going to be really solid. But I do think we're probably going to see mostly Birdring and Rascal, but I think Prophet and Hureg will sort of get tagged in at some point during the match.
I think it'll be, in terms of the long run, I think it'll be kind of meta dependent, since we
Yeah.
have, the hero pools kind of span a large margin. So if one hero starts to get stronger, you can then kind of say like, okay, well, player A is better on this person than player B, so maybe player A will get more time, and then it
Yeah.
kind of moves back and forth, considering however long Blizzard decides to actually update their game.
Yeah, and this is a roster that does have so many different players that are capable of playing different roles that they are kind of future proofed to a degree. I can't see the meta changing in such a way that it's really going to hurt this team, because like you've got guys who can play all the tanks in Fisher and Gesture. You've got an amazing support core with Hagapun, Closer, Bedozin, and Nuss. Wuhyao and Fury look great. Like, you can really put just about any meta in, and this team is going to be able to perform, I think.
Yeah, I think that their biggest issues will be the coaches probably being able to rein them in and help them, especially if they've had a bad day, as well as map selections and who they're playing against.
Yeah,
go
ahead, finish.
I was just gonna finish in saying I think that the players are all extremely capable, and it's more external forces that they'll have to be fighting against rather than their own skill or anything internal.
Yeah, and I do think that this is also going to be a time where we need the coaching staff here to really step up, because they do have a solid coaching staff. Jay Feel, who was the coach for Kongdu Panthera and then C9 Kongdu. Bishop, who's been with Cloud9 for ages. But one of the big strengths for GC Busan going into Apex was their coach, who was able to really sort of identify the weaknesses in other teams and help his team pick them apart. Like, he really elevated that roster to, bring out the best in them. And you do need to find someone who can sort of do what Hokuri did.
Frozen, you have some stuff to say about this as well.
Or yeah, I guess it's kind of backtracking a little bit. I just wanted to talk about how the coaching staff and the team are gonna relate, and how the two different rosters are balanced. But just in the fact that I think a lot of the success of the Spitfire this year is going to come down to how the coaching staff is able to balance the amount of playing time that these two rosters are going to, or how they're going to be able to balance how much time both these teams are playing. I don't agree with separating the two teams specifically, but I do think if that's the route that they're going to go, that the success of this season is based on how Bishop and his team can manage the egos first, and then two, getting them out a playing time for everyone to make them happy. Because I think on paper, this, especially as a two roster team, is probably by far the best team in Overwatch League. But I think that there are too many variables coming down to playing time, coming down to how they balance how the rosters are playing. And I think that while we would ideally say that it is a strength, I think we haven't seen in esports enough that a super team, especially two super teams in one team, can be balanced in a way that it's successful. And the thing that worries me most is that we're going to be not being able to balance this. So what's a good way do you guys think that we can balance the two rosters if they're split, to at least keep them both happy and keep egos in check?
Probably just something like maybe like equal playing time, maybe at least as like a short-term fix, and then maybe, I don't know, just being able to like, I think that the one issue or one thing to kind of take into account is like the Korean culture and how they do things is much different than Western teams do it. Bishop actually talked about this in an interview, and he stated that with Western teams it's more of an open forum where players can voice their concerns, and it's more of a dialogue between the coach and the players about figuring out what's right, where in the sort of Korean style of team play, it's all the coach is like, okay, you jump and you say how high, I'm right and you're wrong, you do what I say. So there might be, more to control just because Bishop and the other coaches have, respect and more authority over the players than you would kind of see otherwise from like different teams.
Yeah, and I do think, the best idea is still going to be to blend the rosters to some degree. Like, it doesn't have to be everyone at once, but like, in scrims, see how the C9 roster does if you stick in Gesture or Wukyal and have them play main tank, and just kind of identify which elements of the roster blend together well, and then you can sort of combat squad it from there. I think that if they keep the rosters split, you're going to need to sort of tailor the matchups to the different teams' play styles. If you see a matchup that you feel like the GC Busan guys are going to be better suited to it, stick them in, but of course, that doesn't necessarily give you equal playing time. It's hard to say, and I think a lot of it will come down to seeing how these roster elements combine, like how the various pieces of the puzzle fit together. But you're right that there aren't a lot of examples of, like, a super team coming together and performing up to the expectations that people have had. Like, for example, G2 in CSGO. But we'll definitely see, because they do have a solid coaching staff. They have great players who they can, definitely find uses for in pretty much any situation. And, maybe this is just, me being the pragmatist, but I don't know that we're necessarily going to have a ton of ego problems for this team, because, they're getting paid real well.
Money is the best influence.
It's a great incentive.
But so we're running short on time. So does anyone have any quick final thoughts about anything before we close out?
I think we're gonna get 2 wins.
Good question. I'm gonna say Spitfire 4-0's Miami, and I think Philly, we might drop a map or two, but I think that our synergy is just worked up a lot better than theirs, and we have more practice time, and we have the more prepared team, so I think that we'll beat Philly at least 3-1 or 3-2.
I will agree. I think that we're going to definitely pick off the Mayhem 4-0. Philadelphia, they might pick up a map just based on sort of the individual skill and flexibility that team has, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it as a 4-0, 3-1. No difficulties, ladies and
gentlemen. Alright, I guess I'll play us out now, so please put your tray table up and return your seats to their full upright positions as we are coming in for a landing. So thank you for listening to our podcast, and we see you in the skies real soon.
Stay classy.
Good night and goodbye.